Summer can be a bit of a slog. For us, it's often for some reason a rather busy time, and I'm sure we're not alone.
Well, you can beat the summertime sadness and the August angst and enhance your everyday with our excellent sponsor, Via Hemp. This is a company that crafts award-winning premium THC and THC-free gummies.
Each of these gummies is especially designed to cultivate a specific mood. Whether you're looking to get relaxed, get quality sleep, get creative, or just to get focused. If you're 21 or older, you can experience it for yourself and get 15% off your first order with our exclusive code MSheet at viahemp.com. That's VIIAHEMP.com.
I personally enjoyed their grapefruit flow state gummies. This CBG and CBD powerhouse really helped me tap into my productivity. Like, we have had an extremely busy summer, and I feel flow state got me over the finish line a few times. When I was editing multiple episodes a day, digging through documents, and knocking out a bunch of interviews.
Via Hemp does not require a medical card, and it ships legally to all 50 states. It's also affordable, and even more so for Murder Sheet listeners who get a special deal.
If you're 21 and older, head to viahemp.com and use code MSheet to receive 15% off. That's VIIAHEMP.com. and use code MSheet at checkout. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Enhance your everyday with Via.
Have you ever covered a carpet stain with a rug? Ignored a leaky faucet? Pretended your half-painted living room is supposed to look like that? Well, you're not alone. We've all got unfinished home projects. But there's an easier way. Thumbtack is the app that makes it easier to care for your home. Pull out your phone and in just a few taps, search, chat, and book highly rated pros right in your neighborhood. Download Thumbtack and start caring for your home the easier way.
This episode is sponsored by AutoTrader. Credit scores, down payments, interest rates. Car buying can be a numbers game, but you don't have to be a math expert to get the keys to your dream car. Just use Kelley Blue Book My Wallet on AutoTrader. Crunch your numbers and get your personalized results so you know exactly how much you'll pay each month for your car. It's like having a magic wand for your wallet. Presto, the car you've been wanting is now within reach. So hit the road and leave your calculator at home. Find your next car on autotrader.com.
Content warning. This episode includes discussion of the murder of 2 girls.
Yesterday, we covered the 2 most recent hearings that both occurred on the same day in the Delphi case, which of course is the case against Richard Allen, a man charged with murdering Abigail Williams and Liberty German. So these were 2 major hearings. There was a lot to cover. We covered them in a preliminary fashion last night, but today we wanted to take the opportunity to essentially go through our notebooks and share with you everything we didn't really hit upon last time.
And also, since last night, we've gotten some questions of why didn't you mention this, or what about that, or how dare you not know who Racehorse Haynes is. So we are going to cover some of that as well.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
We first connected while looking into the Burger Chef murders, an Indiana cold case. Together, we built a spreadsheet documenting hundreds of cases of restaurant-related homicides. That original spreadsheet gave way to our podcast, The Murder Sheet.
Now we maintain that same research-centric, investigative approach as we look into all sorts of homicides, including unsolved cases, historical crimes, and, of course, restaurant murders.
We don't just chat about the headlines. Our podcast is a platform for our journalism. The Murder Sheet focuses on investigative reporting, thoughtful analysis, thorough research, and in-depth interviews.
We're the Murder Sheet.
And this is the Delphi murders. 2 hearings. The aftermath.
Before we even get to the hearings, I think it's important to know that, as we mentioned, Anya and I were actually at this courthouse from 5:30 in the morning to 6 p.m. at night, and then we sped home to record the episode. Because of the rules of that courthouse, we were not permitted to have any phones or electronic devices. So actually during the day when we were there, kind of cut off from the world, there were some filings in the case. I just want to mention a couple of points from some of them very, very briefly before we get into the hearings themselves once again. There was a filing. The state responded to defendant's motion to compel and request for sanctions. What jumped out at me from this is Prosecutor McClelland made some interesting comments about Professor Turco. Professor Turco, as you're probably all very tired of hearing us say, this is the Purdue professor who made some sort of report as to whether or not the sticks at the crime scene represented ruins, represented signs of Odinism run amok. The defense has consistently maintained that Turco supports their position and that the prosecution has tried to hide this from them. They've said that Lieutenant Jerry Holman of the Indiana State Police lied in a summary report he made about an interview with Turco because, again, the assumption is they're trying to hide Professor Turco's real, actual opinions about all of this. That the state, in short, is trying to suggest that Turco did not endorse the idea of Odinism, and the defense is saying, well, actually, he did. So, what did Prosecutor Nick McClelland say about all of this? I'm going to quote, "The interpretation of his report is up for debate amongst the parties, and Professor Turco himself states that the defense has mischaracterized his opinion. If the defense would speak directly to Professor Turco, as the state has, they would know Professor Turco's opinion is not consistent with their characterization." So, translation, McClelland is very clearly saying that what the defense has been saying about the positions of Professor Turco is inaccurate.
That is a very forceful statement. I think it would be hard for any of us to really fairly analyze this until we hear directly from Professor Turco himself, because obviously both sides are going to be saying, he's on our side, he's on our side. But I will say this, if it comes out that the defense has been hammering this Professor Turco thing into the ground and he feels that they've been mischaracterizing what he said, then that looks awful for them. That is ridiculous. I don't know why you would do that and basically put so much weight on such an unsound structure without talking to the guy and making sure like you're in lockstep. I don't understand that. And again, that would just be like trashing your credibility for something that's inevitably going to come out. And why would you do that? That's why I think probably to take a nuanced position in the middle, my guess is that Professor Jeffrey Turco, being an academic, if you've spoken to academics, they're very, very intelligent people. They're very, they don't want to say the wrong thing. Okay. This is their expertise. They spend their lives studying these subjects. And oftentimes I know when I'm talking, I mean, I was a history major. When you're talking to academic historians, they often hedge. They might hedge a bit. If they don't completely know something, they're not the kind of people who are going to be like, yeah, that's totally they might say, well, this, could be that. And my feeling is that he probably gave a nuanced and informative statement to whoever, and both sides were able to have some footholds in it and say, this corresponds with our theory, therefore he's on our side. And I think that's fine. I think like they can maybe both use that then. I think where it becomes a problem is if he really didn't go all in on the Odinist thing, then it makes the defense look like they've been the ones hiding the ball and they've been the ones mischaracterizing him and they've been the ones basically using this in a way that to bolster their point when it doesn't. And I think that that's basically what they're accusing the state of doing. So that would look terrible. if that's the case, I don't know. I don't think we can base our conclusions just on what the prosecution is saying, but I was a little bit, when the defense put out their recap of things that Turco said, they only seemed to be using 2 specific quotations or just like a very small number of words that Turco said during that talk. And that sort of raised my hackles a bit, because I would think if there had been a lot more that was really good for them, they would have included all that to really show people, hey, here's what he said. He was totally backing us up. And so if they've been cherry picking themselves, then I guess it's another thing. It just undermines the public credibility. And that's concerning. So I think we'll be very interested to see what Turco himself has to say. And also, I guess it's interesting that they maybe haven't talked to him again, because I would think if they were like really planning to use this a lot, they would have interviewed him a second, or, get him in there and, kind of make something out of this. That's just my dig.
So the other filing, which I wanted to very briefly discuss, is a motion for parity in resources. One thing this defense team has consistently done is they try to find as many ways as possible to argue for what they want. They tried many different routes. And so in this document, they're saying, well, we haven't gotten paid as we should be getting paid. But the bulk of this is they're criticizing and they're unhappy that the judge has not approved their request for funding for specific experts. And they're saying, well, this isn't fair because the state has experts and we don't. So what can be done? Well, one thing that could be done, they said, is we can just exclude from the trial all talk of ballistics or the confessions. Or we can make Nick McClelland start paying for his experts. Or you can just start giving us money to pay for the experts we want. So I wanted to highlight that these are issues they were discussing. And then I wanted also to briefly mention something from here that we will stick a pin in and we'll talk a bit more about later in this episode. They mention all of the members of the defense team. And one of the members of the defense team is a gentleman named Brian Alvey.
He came up in the hearing yesterday.
And we will discuss that in a few minutes.
So this is kind of, to me, if they're the public defenders on this, they should be getting paid for their labor. They should be being compensated. I don't know why there have been so many issues with paying them. Some people love the defense attorneys. Some people don't like them. I don't really care how you feel about them. They're the defense attorneys on this. They need to get paid. I don't know what the issue with funding their experts are. I know the judge has some say and they can't bring in a psychic to say, I don't feel the bullet came from Richard Allen's gun. So but I'm sure they're not doing something like that where it's totally disreputable people. So I don't know what the issues are there, but it feels like.
I'd like to take a moment to vigorously agree with what you're saying. People deserve to be paid for their work.
Yes. And in a timely fashion. At the end of the day, public defense is incredibly important work. And if you're not paying people in a timely manner, you could be harming their business. Both of these men are typically, standard private criminal defense lawyers. They have their firms. They're both facing, I would imagine, pretty steep opportunity costs at the same time as, being paid what I imagine is less than their normal rate, maybe even substantially less than their normal rate by the state. So I don't see what the issue is here. I know that there probably was stuff that got delayed and whatnot when they were kicked off the case, but at this point, they're back on the case. They should be paid.
Achieving a gorgeous grin from home isn't a total mystery with Byte Clear aligners. Just don't be surprised if all of your sleuthing friends start asking, what's your secret? Begin by ordering your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95. Byte Clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces. Plus, they offer flexible financing, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
What makes a life a good one? Is it the adventure you have? or the friends you find along the way. Maybe it's pursuing your passion while striving to protect, defend, and save what you believe in every single day. So, what makes a life a good one? In the Coast Guard, we think it's all of the above and more, but you'll have to find out for yourself. Visit gocoastguard.com to learn more.
If you're a new parent, a bad day means you either ran out of coffee, diapers, patience, or all of the above. Stocking up on cold brew and deep breaths are all you. Hello Bello's got your baby's butt covered. Because Hello Bello believes all families deserve premium, affordable baby products. With their ultra-convenient diaper bundle subscription service that includes 7 packs of diapers and 4 packs of plant-based wipes, you'll never run out of supplies. Better yet, they're delivered to your door. Set, change, and cancel your delivery schedule whenever you want. If you're a parent, your to-do list is longer than all your baby's wake windows combined. Let Hello Bello take care of diaper runs until you're done potty training. It was named Best Diaper Subscription by New York Magazine and winner of the 2022 Good Housekeeping Parenting Award for a reason. Go to hellobello.com/Wondery to get 30% off your first customized bundle and a full-size freebie product of your choice. That's hellobello.com/Wondery to start bundling with 30% off your first order. Don't forget, that's hellobello.com/Wondery.
So with that said, why don't we dive in? Where do you want to begin? We've made a list of topics we want to cover. Where do you want to start on? Yeah.
Do you want to hit the track with the old racehorse? That's such a great name. We were both fascinated by that. So, when Attorney Boren sort of took the stand, he talked about like studying with like different attorneys, and he mentioned a racehorse Haynes, and
I find that name delightful.
Yes.
I find that name out of Damon Runyon.
Yeah, it is out of a Damon Runyon.
And so I said one of the highlights of the day. And so people are outraged that I did not know who Racehorse Haynes was. And frankly, I deserve that outrage.
I agree.
I should be
hard
and feathered, locked in the stocks, tortured, whatever you want. The harshest criticism that has ever been leveled against any human being deserves to be leveled against me on this point, because he is a very distinguished attorney, and he also figures in, frankly, an excellent true crime book that I will try to pitch to Anya to cover in our book club. This is a book called Blood and Money. And further than that, deponents say it not, because I don't want to have any spoilers for that book. But this man has a very distinguished career. I've actually read Blood and Money and enjoyed it many years ago. And somehow I let the name Racehorse Haynes slip through my mind.
How?
So I vigorously apologize and admit my ignorance in forgetting about the proud legacy of Racehorse Haynes.
I want to add, Mr. Boren, I loved his testimony.
Mr. Boren was the man that brought up Racehorse Haynes.
He was the man who brought up Racehorse Haynes. He spoke about, for the defense, here's why that maybe this doesn't rise to contempt. He and the other attorneys brought out to do that all did a great job. I thought that one thing that he said that, hey, I'm like, wow, like this is, just incredible Indiana true crime nerd history. So he apparently tried the Stephen Judy case, and this is a very disturbing case. I'm familiar with it because it came up in relation to Burger Chef murders, which, Kevin and I covered. And some people feel that Stephen Judy must have been the one to do it because essentially the case he's known for is incredibly horrifically brutal, like horrific. And the feeling is he's a brutal man, must have done Burger Chef. I don't agree with that at all because I think the crimes look very different. But just to give you all a sense, this was a huge deal in Indiana at the time. He was executed. I think he was one of and he was at the tail end of like executions that happened, in the 70s. They think there were more recent executions as well. So I don't mean to say that it stopped entirely, but it was a really big deal. This is a man who, Stephen Judy, abducted a young woman and her children, raped and murdered the mother, and threw the children into a creek where they drowned. These were small children. And when he was arrested and confronted with killing these kids, he said essentially, well, I'm paraphrasing, but well, it's not my fault they couldn't swim. So this is a man who is incredibly brutal. Again, big deal in Indiana, this case. And to hear from an attorney who is so distinguished and like, has such a lengthy career that he actually had a part in that case was just fascinating. So I thought that was kind of cool. It's a very disturbing case, but just kind of an interesting thing. Like, did not expect that to come up yesterday.
And Boren said something else, which kind of segues rather nicely into the next thing we want to discuss. Mr. Boren said it's very important, of course, for lawyers to consult with other lawyers about how they do their cases. But then he went on to elaborate that and say that actually it's even more important for lawyers to talk with non-lawyers, because people who are not lawyers have different perspectives, things hit them in different ways, and that can help you better formulate how you communicate with a jury. And so this leads into our next point, because there have been some questions, why didn't we talk more about the testimony that Todd Klick offered pertaining to Odinism? And I admit that as an attorney, I look at things through that framework. And so I look at the Klick testimony and I think this is something that's going to be interesting and perhaps important at a trial. But at this hearing, the point of this hearing was to try to establish one particular point. And that point is, what did law enforcement know about Brad Holder / Odinism in 2017? And Klick's testimony was not the least bit relevant to that point. It may be relevant to other points which may be considered at trial. He could potentially be an incredibly important witness at the trial. But at this hearing yesterday, he did not have any testimony to offer that was on point on the limited point they wanted to cover yesterday. And so because of that, my assumption was, well, this testimony therefore isn't important to this hearing. And so we didn't cover it extensively. If you want to know more about what Mr. Klick said, it was very, very similar to what was written in the Franks memorandum, which I assume most of you have read. And I think some of the interest in Officer Klick's comments springs from comments made about Klick's testimony by a gentleman named Bob Mata, who has a YouTube channel. He reported that Klick indicated that a man named Johnny Messer had some sort of recording on his phone which depicted Messer kidnapping a girl. And the implication was, oh, look, he kidnapped a girl. The crime under consideration here is the kidnapping of two girls. So these would seem to be very, very similar crimes. And so why isn't the talk about Johnny Messer having a recording of him kidnapping a girl getting much discussion? And the simple reason is there is no recording of Johnny Messer kidnapping a girl. We've had our beefs with Mr. Mata and how he runs his program and how accurate his program is. Certainly at one point, he had David Hennessy on the show where a ridiculous lie about me was repeated for some reason. But in this case, let's be generous and let us assume that Mr. Mata simply misheard things.
Which, let me say, it was really hard to hear a lot of this. When people are, and listen, this isn't Klick's fault. This is not to blame Mr. Klick, but, and a courthouse is not always like set up like a stage where the acoustics are great and you can kind of hear everything. Sometimes it's possible for things to get garbled and then telephone, and then maybe you kind of put your own assumptions on it. And, I think I'd rather be, I'd rather show grace on this because I do think it is very possible. And honestly, this is why I feel it's so important for cameras to be allowed in the courtroom. I don't think that's going to happen at this point because there's been too much, people are fighting in the courthouse. There's been leaks. I think we've lost the cameras. I think that was possible for a time. Maybe now it's not, but I wish we could have cameras in the courtrooms, even for some of these pretrial hearings, because then we could have perhaps less confusion on points like this. And if a creator made a mistake, people could quickly see for themselves and say, oh, he didn't quite say that. here's what he really said.
So if you're under the impression that the media and other podcasters are covering up this supposedly bombshell revelation about a recording of a potential suspect in this case actually committing a similar crime, be advised that there were no such bombshell revelations. That was not what Click was talking about. Can you tell us what Click was talking about?
So there was a kidnapping discussed. And yeah, I mean, certainly when you're talking about a kidnapping, that's a violent act. What Click mentioned was back in 2018, there was a raid on the residence that Johnny Messer shared with his girlfriend at the time, Taylor Hornaday. And her phone ended up being seized, or, basically a phone that had a recording on it of Messer and another man named Eric Basham, abducting a man after a methamphetamine deal gone wrong. So what happened was Basham and Messer drive up to the Indianapolis area for this meth deal. They get ripped off. Then they go find the guy who arranged the deal. They abduct him at gunpoint. They're pointing a gun at him. And they're driving around essentially until they find methamphetamine to make up for the deal. So it's a drug deal gone wrong, resulting in an abduction.
Which did not lead to a murder.
Which did not lead to a murder in this case, fortunately.
So a drug deal gone bad, leading to a kidnapping, is very, very, very dissimilar from the crime that we're considering here, the murder of Libby German and Abby Williams. So you can take this as evidence that maybe Mr. Messer is not a good guy, or maybe Mr. Messer has problems.
Also, let's say this. You can do something that's drug-related violence, and you can do something that's violence towards children or more sexually motivated violence. It's not like you can't do both. But I also think it's important to say they also are very different. So I don't think you should necessarily conflate being a bad guy or being involved in drugs with doing that at the same time. That's not evidence. To me, it's more compelling when someone is accused of something that very much falls in line with the main crime in question. If there was abduction of children in order to sexually assault them or something of that nature, or, some sort of child molestation going on, that might be something to look at closely. I think a sort of a business transaction in the drug world that leads to violence, to me, just looks very different than what happened to Abby and Libby. Abby and Libby were not, dealing meth. I mean, it doesn't fit. And it's very unfortunate because of the lack of cameras, we do get into a game of telephone where people kind of go put something out there and then suddenly everyone's inflamed. How could people not be talking about this? And
yeah, we're seeing lots of comments. Why didn't we talk about this bombshell? Why isn't the mainstream media covering this bombshell? And this bombshell simply didn't exist. And again, we're choosing to believe that Mr. Mott has simply misheard something very easy to happen in that courtroom. So we just want to jump in as quickly as we can and try to cut off this rumor before it spreads even further.
And to be clear, I think what Kevin said earlier bears repeating. I think, as a former law enforcement officer with a background and some experience with this investigation, Todd Click is going to be a credible voice for the defense if this, continues to be the route they're going on. He's somebody who put in a lot of work and obviously cares a lot about the case. He felt very strongly that it has to be the Odinist theory, and he's going to potentially advocate for that in trial. That could be very important. The jury could find him persuasive. We didn't really get to hear that much from him because ultimately what he was saying was not relevant to the hearing, but I thought he seemed to do a decent job on the stand. He seemed like a credible guy. And so I think it's not to dismiss him or his story or his importance, but it is to say that, not everything is going to be right for every hearing. And I will stand by the criticism that, bringing him out like this and kind of maybe putting their theory out there to the extent that they are could give the prosecution more time to pick it apart better. And I kind of do feel like elements of the Odinist theory would be really compelling to a jury, but that might be less of the case if the prosecution has effective pushback techniques that they can hone over time for hearing about this again and again and again. Does that make sense? Like,
that makes sense.
I feel like some of this would be like great shock and awe for the jury. Like, whoa, it was a conspiracy. We gotta acquit him. But if the prosecution is able to effectively dismantle that, then maybe some of this looks like an error in retrospect.
Yes. So there was another thing that Anya picked up on in Todd Click's testimony that's a little bit more personal, maybe a little silly. We'll let you decide. It was something that completely flew over my head at the time. What was it?
Yes. When Click was speaking, he mentioned an investigator for the criminal defense team. And I immediately recognized the name because recently there was a guy.
The name was Brian Albee.
Brian Albee. Yeah, Brian Albee. And recently there was a guy on Facebook with the same name who tried to send a friend request to Kevin and I. We have a professional account to like kind of like be in more of like our own Facebook group. And then we have personal accounts. And it was kind of funny because this person friended all three at once. So it was kind of noticeable. We were like, who is this guy?
And it's interesting that a defense investigator is trying to become our friend on Facebook, especially since at this hearing, as we mentioned, we were a bit of a focus. They were obviously trying to talk about, how did Kevin and Anya get this document or this document? They're trying to figure out who our sources were. I can certainly tell you that we've been friends in the past with other reporters, and sometimes on their Facebook pages, they're Facebook friends with some of their sources.
That's a mistake. Don't do that.
Yeah, that's pretty sloppy. So,
well, I mean, in fairness, it's like if it's one of those things where they were a source for years and then you don't really report on that beat anymore, it's not really sloppy. But it's definitely one of those things where we just try to be really careful. We really try to exercise like the confidentiality hygiene that you're supposed to as a journalist.
So I think it's plausible.
Also, this was a week ago. This was recently. This guy tried to friend us recently.
Right before this hearing where our sources are a source of contention for them at a hearing. So it is plausible that during this time where they're rushing around trying to get ready for a speedy trial, they are spending time and energy trying to investigate us and learn who our sources are. Or what else is possible?
We might have come up as suggested friends, and he was like, oh, cool. I listen to them occasionally and hit friend. It's
right.
Also possible that I'm not going to listen without knowing the guy and without knowing what's going on here. I'm not necessarily going to assume that there was any weird intent with that. So I'm going to assume it was chill. You yourself have a habit of friending random actors from like television history, from like shows you like.
From the past.
And also, I mean, to me, the most impressive.
Well, let me say first.
Yeah.
I happen to have known in real life some old time television writers. And so I was friends with them on Facebook. And then it would just start suggesting to me people that they knew. And so I would just say, oh, sure, I'll friend this person. And then the more of those requests that you send out that get actually accepted, then you start getting suggestions for friends of those people. And those people may not recognize your name, but they may say, oh, this person certainly has a lot of friends that I know. And so I ended up getting friends with a lot of old time actors and writers and producers.
So you essentially socially engineered yourself into being a Hollywood insider. That's what happened.
Yes, I have my finger on the pulse of the Hollywood TV scene of the 1970s.
Okay, the coolest one, in my opinion, was the guy who played one of a show we both love is the just often absolutely unhinged television series that was Kojak, starring Telly Savalas, about a smooth talking detective in New York City in the 70s. New York City looks like it's coming unglued. He's smooth talking. Just everyone loves him. And there's one guy who's a side character who's a detective on that also named Detective Crocker. That's the character's name, not the actor's name.
Actor's name, of course,
I don't know.
Kevin Dobson.
Okay, another Kevin. So you friended him. I love this character because he's just like uncontained, like he's like barely contained rage all the time, but he's keeping it calm, but you can tell he's really pissed off. And his character's really funny to me. And I was very impressed that you snagged him on your friend list. And unfortunately, he's since deceased. But
so this may be a case of Mr. Alvey just randomly friending people or deciding he liked the podcast.
Yeah.
A week before the hearing.
I think
we're going to be discussed.
I think you're more suspicious. I'm more like, Also, yeah, that would be barking up the wrong tree because we're definitely not. We're definitely pretty buttoned up on social media, I would say.
Yeah, and if my suspicions are true and they're using their precious time to try to investigate us, that's a really stupid use of their resources.
That is, yeah. It actually reminds me, we've been in a situation where a police agency tried to figure out who our sources were one time. And it was like...
They didn't succeed.
Nice try. Like, there were traps set. I'm not kidding. There were traps set to like, hunt down. And it did not work because we were very careful. We take that very seriously. We don't mess around. And
by trap set, that's a bit melodramatic.
That is.
Let me explain. Let me explain.
They were coming out with a big butterfly net. No, I'm just kidding.
What you do in that case is you say, okay, there's a piece of information that the murder sheet has maybe 6 other people in real life in our agency had this information. So the murder sheet had to get that information from one of the 6 people. So then what you do is you mention another big upcoming event that you know the murder sheet would want to know about. And you tell each of those persons a slightly different detail about it. Maybe you tell one person this event's going to happen on Monday. The next person you say it's going to happen on Tuesday. The third person you say Wednesday, and so on. So then if the murder sheet calls you, or if the murder sheet then reports, oh, this big event is going to happen on Monday, then you've basically succeeded in outing the source. And so that's what they tried to do.
It's called a canary trap. So that's what that is when you do that.
So there's a few other odds and ends we wanted to mention. I think there was something else you wanted to highlight from the testimony of Brad Rosie.
Yeah, this was a little bit odd. This happened a while ago. I understand that, people are speaking potentially somewhat off the cuff, but I thought it was a little bit odd and wanted to highlight it. So in the discussion, let's go back in time. Let's talk about the letter that Brad Rosie filed with the court in which he explained from his perspective how the revelation about Mitch Westerman leaking discovery materials went down. He described Westerman going to Baldwin and confessing, saying, I did this. Then Baldwin wrote Rosie an email. Rosie, at that time, he's involved with the school board in his district, and he was there, and then he went home, I'm assuming spent time with his family. When you're off the clock, maybe you're not checking your email. He didn't get that email. Kevin and I at the time commented when that letter came out that it seemed really odd that Baldwin didn't call and leave a bunch of messages. If he did, that was not mentioned in Rosie's letter. But when something of that significance happens, one would think that you would be urgently trying to reach your partner to let them know that fallout is coming. So, but then again, maybe you're in a panic, or maybe you're kind of just depressed to hear what happened. So Rosie didn't really get that information until the next day, essentially when he checks his email. And then they go to McClelland and then the judge together. So that's his initial explanation. On the stand a number of times, he said something to the effect of, I got this the same day as Baldwin got it. And I think I understand what he was trying to say, which is basically Baldwin passed it on to me. But the reality is he didn't see it until the next day. And therefore that's when the action happened. So again, I think he was I don't think this was a lie. I don't think this was necessarily an attempted deception. I just think it was kind of cleverly phrased because he didn't really get it because it was sent in an email and he didn't check his email for a while. So
Yes.
there were like hours and hours and hours when Baldwin was aware of something that Rosie seemingly was not.
Yes. There was a substantial period of time, maybe 12 hours or around 12 hours, where Baldwin and Westerman were the only people aware of this information.
And like, I think that Rosie is very much standing by Baldwin. I think he has. I think he could have probably gone in a different direction and sort of thrown Baldwin under the bus and essentially said, listen, I don't know this guy. This is not my office. I wasn't the one who sent the email. You know, I'm not to blame in any of this. Instead, he really has stuck by Baldwin and they seem to have, you know, that kind of professional bond. So I don't think he's going to throw him over. But I do feel like that was sort of, you know, said in a way to maybe mitigate some of the fallout for Baldwin. So I think that does speak to them actually being in sync and being, you know, kind of committed to the partnership. So that's something I noted.
So there was also some feedback that people felt we used the term YouTubers as a pejorative.
It's an insult in my book. No, so yeah, I mean, that's fair. I think to me, like, YouTube has become synonymous with me for just a really toxic environment around this case. I think I kind of tend to view it as a result as sort of a swamp filled with sinister characters, frankly. And I don't think I'm entirely wrong. I should note that there are some YouTubers who cover this that I think are very nice people and do a good job and try their best and just, you know, I when I say YouTubers, I really don't mean all YouTubers. There is a type of Delphi YouTuber that I think is very easily identifiable that is totally unhinged and just does bizarre things all the time that are detrimental to the case. But many do not fit that mold, and I have no issue with them.
And I wanted to highlight just on a personal level, I admit I'm not familiar with his channel, but there is a gentleman named Frank Meister who attends, I believe, every single hearing. He always behaves very respectfully with proper decorum, compassion. He's always a gentleman, always friendly to anyone who approaches him.
Yeah.
So there are YouTubers who behave like that, who behave like adults.
He brings a very positive energy to his work, I feel, and kind of comes into things respectfully. And I always appreciate chatting to him at these hearings because I just feel like he's like, I think a lot of, I mean, behind the scenes, we talk to reporters, and a lot of people are honestly very concerned about the impact of social media and the impact of YouTube and what that's going to be like on this case. And I just wish that everybody would act like Frank Meister at these things because he's so respectful and just like a very nice guy. Like, I really like Frank. And I don't know. I just feel like many do not. I think probably most of the YouTubers are fine. And like, there's other ones that we like. So we're not going to just name everybody, but like, he's just a good example because
we just talked to him the other day.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
The other hearing.
So I feel like, though, I will say people are concerned. Reporters are concerned. A number of reporters separately have said, what happens if one of these guys just stands up in the middle of the trial and starts screaming in front of the jury? You know, like, there could be literally a mistrial over this. And
that could happen.
That could very easily happen. We just had Rick Snee and another man get into a physical altercation.
Other man is a gentleman named Noe Ramos.
Noe Ramos.
Who was formerly incarcerated in some fashion with Kagan Klein.
Yeah, at Miami County. And so they've been threatening one another over social media for some time and then inevitably got into a fight at this thing. And it's like, if this happens at trial, it could actually have like a huge implication on the case. And what I would hope would happen, and I don't know that this is going to happen, and frankly, I've been disappointed to a certain extent by Judge Gull's lack of media strategy on some of this, but I would hope that there would be press passes given to reputable outlets. You know, maybe outlets could apply for them and get 2 or 3 press passes, and that there would be designated media seating, and that there would be overflow seating for members of the public. This is a very cramped courthouse, very cramped courtroom in Carroll County. There's not going to be a lot of room. I think they need to be very intentional about who is allowed in there. You do not want to get people who are flying in from out of state or out of country who think that, they can have, few moments of attention from the world by disrupting a case. You don't want that. You don't want to incentivize that. So I think you really need to be intentional about how you approach this because, we're in an internet age. People doing bad things in a case like this makes people feel important. Like maybe they justify it to themselves because they think they're doing the right thing. But I think there's an element of like people want to be infamous. And I think that if you just kind of keep at this thing where you're sort of lumping in the traditional media that's covering this responsibly with everybody else, you could kind of get into a crazy situation easily. And
Rick Snee came very close to having a moment in the sun. He came very close to having a moment where he would be called upon to testify at a hearing. And I think that's something he looked forward to for whatever reason. Certainly, Anya and I would not look forward to that, but I believe he looked forward to that, and that is his right. And he lost that opportunity because he let his temper get the best of him. And some people are saying, well, maybe he was goaded. But if he was goaded, I'm not making any statements whether he was goaded or not, but if he was goaded, the person goading him won. Because whatever Rick Snee, by participating in this scuffle, he lost something that was important to him. He lost a chance to tell his story.
I feel like adults should never lay hands on other adults in a professional setting or otherwise.
Or chest bump each other.
There should be no physical contact. I don't think there should be screaming matches. I think if someone is trying to start something with you, you walk away, maybe you report that to security saying they're trying to get into something, I'm concerned. Or, you don't let them know exactly, what buttons to push to.
Yeah. This is some advice I give freely to Mr. Snee or to anyone else who cares to listen to it. That if someone succeeds in finding a sore spot, if someone succeeds in finding this is a subject I can address to really make this other person angry, don't let them know that. Don't let them be given that victory, because if they know, now here's a way to attack this person and get a strong reaction, that means that information is going to get out there and everybody and their mother is going to start attacking you in that area in order to get a strong reaction. Just act like it doesn't bother you. I admit this is why I have really studiously avoided letting any of my enemies know that the way to really get my goat and make me furious is to talk at length about how handsome and charming I am.
Kevin, now they're going to swarm you at the next one. You look lovely today, Mr. Greenlee. Kevin hulks out.
Nothing I hate worse than to be compared favorably to Cary Grant.
It's all joking aside. We have to remember members of the public coming into this. I think most people, YouTubers, members of the public are fine. They're here because they're interested and there's no issue with them. A lot of them are very nice. I enjoy talking to them while we're waiting outside. So that's fine. But I think people do need to kind of come into this with respectfulness and a recognition that it's not about all of us in the audience. It really should be about the case and Richard Allen and the girls and their families. And like anything that's rising to the level of we're getting in a fist fight, is not worth it and it's not appropriate. And people who do that should be banned. They should not be back. I mean, because if you're not able to keep it together for something as serious as this, then you don't belong in this space. You just don't, because like you don't have the impulse control. And I mean, it's a shame that it happened, but I do hope it leads to some tighter, security perhaps, or some, maybe tighter regulations about what's going to happen going forward, or at least some recognition of like, we need to keep a lid on stuff like this, because you don't want some YouTube feud to break out in violence in the middle of a
hearing involving the death of two girls.
Yeah. It's not,
so I don't,
I'm like, actually, like every time we go to this, I look forward to the hearing and it's going to be interesting, but I also have a lot of dread because I am, as just somebody who attends these things, I am sometimes scared of being, a victim of violence or being caught up in violence that occurs at these things. And like, it shouldn't be like that, but that is how it is. And other people have made similar comments that we're scared because some people cannot keep it together. And that is not okay. Like, I can't stress enough how not okay that is, that people are actually like, somebody might just come over and punch me. Like that is the environment at some of these things. And it's not good.
And again, when Mr. Snee lost his temper, that meant that whatever testimony he was prepared to offer was also lost. I don't know what that testimony was. There was some hints there was going to be some attacks on us, but let's assume, for the sake of argument, that his testimony was relevant.
That's definitely, it was not. I mean, that's overly generous.
I'm just saying, by losing his temper, he lost the opportunity to share his story with the court.
Well, I'm going to say this. It was very amusing to me because at the end of all this, in his closing statement, David Hennessy, pops off with like, there's two camps. They're always fighting. I don't know what like lore he's reading from on the Delphi case. I think there's more like 15 camps and they're always fighting. This is there are a lot of offshoot groups here. This is not a simple war between Rome and Carthage, but I would say that he's like, they're fighting outside. And it's like, Mr. Hennessy, you brought this guy, you brought Rick Snee in to be your like little star witness at the last moment and made a big deal in filings about how important he was. And, how much, oh, wow. Like, he jumped up and said Eureka when he got this guy on the phone. And he's the one fighting outside. So what does that say about the decision that you made to bring these people in? That they're then fighting in the streets.
And my understanding is that the cause of this fight, it was not a fight about any of the issues directly related to the case.
It was just egos. It was like, you insulted me, you insulted my wife. Okay. Like, walk away. But anyways, I just thought it was amusing that Hennessy tried to be like, isn't it chaotic? The people that I bring into this? It's like, what is going on? I thought that was amusing that he brought that up as a point of like saying, yeah, I can't believe this.
And I hope no one ever talks about how great and wonderful you are, because that would also just set me off.
Don't talk about my wife. She sucks.
I know the truth.
You don't have to live with her.
Then I think you pulled out a few items from your notes that you wanted to highlight.
Yeah, these were a few things around just kind of the just different elements, and I'm going to kind of tackle them in no particular order. But one thing that I noticed was when Hennessy had Holman on the stand, had Jerry Holman from the state police. He talked about, so there was some bizarre exchange where Holman wouldn't sign the deposition that Hennessy did because apparently it was like rife with inaccuracies. So I don't know what happened there, but that just struck me as like really odd. Like, how does that happen?
And we can talk a little bit about this inaccuracy issue by again mentioning, of all people, Rick Snee. In a filing, David Hennessy said that Jerry Holman's report said that Rick Snee said he got the pictures from a woman named Kay Smith. And Rick Snee said, no, I never said that. And Jerry Holman said, that wasn't in my report.
So Snee says that Holman told him that was not in his report.
Yes.
So that's all coming from Snee.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's important to note.
But as you've indicated, there are inaccuracies in the...
Yeah, but it's like, how does that happen? I mean, that just seems really concerning. I would just think that would...
What other inaccuracies are in there? So
that's other inaccuracy to the point, where someone's not going to sign it. That just, there are a number of times where, in addition to that, Hennessy, it happened to McClellan once in a, kind of a very extreme and awkward situation where he's like, there's this email that proves what I'm saying. And then it was like felt like 10 hours looking for the email that he was then unable to find. So I was like, that's awkward. something similar happened to Hennessy a number of times where he'd have to pause and like scramble around to find different papers. There was like a level of disorganization that seemed to be there, although again, that may just be some people's style. I myself am very disorganized. I can't keep track of anything, so I would understand that juggling a lot of this would be difficult.
One of Hennessy's strategies seemed to be the strategy of personally insulting others. This seems to be like almost an alpha male strategy, or we're great and they're dumb. I remember at one point, for instance, he said, "Oh, these lawyers on our side are great. And they're each more experienced than Nick McClelland." And I don't think judges or most people really find that sort of posturing to be too persuasive. I'd even go as far to say, personally, when a person is in an argument about an important issue and that person resorts to name calling or suggesting that his or her opponent is an idiot or inexperienced, that makes me assume that the person making those statements doesn't really have a good case. Because why do you need to insult the person on the other side unless that's all you have? If they're really saying stupid things, or if they're really saying things that don't hold up, you can point that out in great detail without personally insulting them.
I disagree. I think that kind of bravado can work for some people, but I think it has to be done from a position of at least perceived power. Like if you're basically dunking, I mean, this is not very nice and I personally find it off-putting, but if you're dunking on someone and you are like, it's slam dunking the ball and they're unable to block you again and again, and you're kind of like trash talking them. Some people might like that because they're like, yeah, get them. But, that's not what this hearing was, especially for Hennessy. I mean, like, if his, like, this is kind of, I mean, maybe having too much experience in his case made him somewhat complacent, because I feel like he kind of, seemed to kind of fall apart a few times during this thing. Like, it was not a particularly, this was not his Clarence Darrow moment, is I guess what I'm trying to say. And I think it's disappointing. Obviously he went after us a bit, and that's whatever. I mean, like, basically like calling us the murder sheet people, whatever. If he wants to do free advertising for us, that's fine. I would say though that like we've seen him do a good job. I thought his defense of Baldwin and Rosie at the hearing where they kind of showed up uninvited and then got kicked out was really good. Like he kind of stood up, gave this speech about, what he wanted on the record. And I thought he did a really good job. And it was like short, sweet, to the point, persuasive. And I was expecting more of something along those lines at this thing. Instead, he just came across as woefully unprepared a lot of times. And it didn't quite carry the day. So when you're insulting people and then looking and acting like that during the thing, it's like, ugh, like, yikes. I wrote down when he was talking at one point, just the words, yeesh. Like, I mean, and Gull was not having it. He kept on interrupting her. I don't know whether that was because of his hearing issues or he just doesn't care at this point, but it just was like, it wasn't, I didn't feel like this was a good performance from him on several levels.
You mentioned Hennessy's appearance at the trial. Rather, you mentioned Hennessy's appearance at the pretrial hearing, where two other attorneys were appointed to represent Richard Allen. And I think it's worth mentioning that one of those two attorneys was actually present yesterday.
Yeah. So this is, so we've been informed by several wonderful listeners. Actually, we've been pronouncing his name wrong, so we do apologize. So William Libredo was one of the attorneys on the case who was brought in by Gull and then left. So he was on this, and then, so he seemed to be, I believe I saw him in the audience, but beforehand, as we were lining up, a number of ladies, who were there kind of as members of the public, I think they saw him and they were like, "Oh, it's William Libredo. It's William Libredo." He just like breezes past everybody. And it's like, and I think it's Libredo. And then he breezes past everyone and it's just like, "It's Libredo," and like bounces out. So I was like, wow. He seemed to be, I guess, there as just sort of an interested, I mean, he had this kind of brush with this case, and he was interviewed by Barbara McDonald of Court TV on it, and it seems like some of his interest remains, and he sort of wanted to see what was going on today. So he did show up for at least part of that hearing, not sitting in the defense designated section, but just sitting, I believe I saw him in our row, which was the first row of the public seating. May have not been him. I guess I don't want to just in case it was another similar looking guy, but I'm like 98% certain that was him.
Yeah.
And we definitely saw him beforehand because he identified himself.
So what else did you want to mention from yesterday?
There was from Hennessy, there was some discussion of R, a man who unfortunately died by suicide in the midst of the leak investigation. He was kind of part of the chain that formed the leak. He got them from Westerman. And Hennessy seemed to oddly go after him a little bit. He kind of indicated that R was dishonest because Cohen had the impression that R was claiming to be an attorney. That is something we reported as well. That is something that Cohen told us as well. That's not evident that R was doing that in any of the screenshots that we reviewed. He never says, I'm an attorney, or here's what I'm doing. But we just don't know because we don't know the discussions between R and Cohen. I'm just noting that we don't have any evidence for that. But Hennessy also said that, kind of stressed that there's no provable link, direct link between R and Baldwin. It seemed like he was kind of pointing towards the idea that R might have been, I don't know, I think it was kind of part of attacking the facts of the leak of maybe there's something more going on here. He didn't really go far down that path though, so I don't entirely know what he was getting at, but it is worth noting. Obviously, unfortunately, R is not here anymore to defend himself or give his side of the story, so that's just obviously an incredible tragedy amidst all of this stuff. But in the middle of this, Hennessy even addressed the crowd, he was breaking the fourth wall. I forget what he said. It was almost, I think it was, I'm paraphrasing here, but I think it was something stick around or stay tuned, and people laughed, and it was just I don't know, a guy died, I don't it just, I don't know, maybe it struck me the wrong way because of the underlying tragedy around this, but yeah, it was definitely interesting. I think if I might, you didn't mention one of the filings, there was some information about an investigator who once worked with the defense team.
Oh, it mentioned also that they used to use an investigator out of Utah.
Which always struck us as bizarre because you would think you'd want someone on the ground in Indiana. But that investigator is Jason Jensen.
They indicate that they used him for a short time. That representation ended because of geographical issues. It's unclear how long he worked on the case. Certainly, we had a question about that ourselves, and we called him sometime over the winter, and he indicated to us that his work on the case continued at least up until the time that Brad Rosie and Andrew Baldwin were removed from the case.
Yeah. So we don't know who's right.
At the very least, this seems to be confirmation that he's no longer working on the case.
Yes. And I guess anything else about the motion to dismiss the case or Todd Click or any of that?
I don't think so. Again, the Todd Click testimony may arguably be incredibly relevant at the trial. It didn't really seem to be relevant to what they needed to prove yesterday.
And I just think if you take away one thing from all of this, it's that the stuff that has been disseminated about what Click said about there being recording of some sort of child abduction or abduction of a girl, abduction of anything of that nature is incorrect. It was a drug-related abduction that, when you actually look at the details, is strikingly different from Delphi. That's not to say that, if you can prove a history of violent behavior, that might be relevant. But I think I've seen a lot of people just sort of run with this idea that there was something to this that there wasn't. And it's frankly disheartening to see, because I feel like we're once again we're just seeing misinformation spread like wildfire across the internet in this case. And it's really important that even if you're rooting hard for one side, that we don't do this, because that doesn't benefit anybody. And let the facts speak for themselves. Let Click testify at trial, and maybe he sways the jury with his belief that Messer and company are better suspects. But we don't need to twist around Click's words in order to sort of get cheap internet points at this early date. I just don't.
Because the fact is, it's very easy to twist people's words, whether it's Click or Professor Turco, but it's easy to do that now before a trial and cross-examination. The ultimate truth of what these people are actually saying will be revealed to the jurors at the trial. And if people are twisting their words now, they're not going to look like they have much credibility at the trial.
That's the thing. Credibility is all we have at the end of the day. And making mistakes is understandable. But when we do that, it's important to stand up and note that and take ownership for it. Because we ultimately, if we're advocating for one side or another, we're actually doing that side more harm by doing stuff like this, because you're making it clear to anybody who's not already converted that, you know, the facts are not necessarily on your side, or perhaps misinformation or even outright deception is rife. And so when I see stuff like this, it makes me sad, because I will also say I think that if there had been something of that magnitude revealed in the hearing yesterday, that would have been the wall-to-wall story on every outlet. Like, there's video of a child kidnapping on Johnny Messer's phone. First of all, the question would be, well, why was it never charged or reported on? So that would be one thing. But the other thing would be, oh my gosh, there's a pattern here. Like that's the kind of story that
would be huge.
The journalists at the traditional outlets are looking for. You hear them talking in the hallway. What are the main points? What do we need to highlight? What do we need to do? What's the big thing that our audience cares about? Especially television, you need to boil things down to the big points that your audience is going to care about. And let me tell you, another child abduction being uncovered on one of the defense's suspects' phones and dropped as a bombshell in the middle of this thing, that's what they're looking for.
That would have been huge, but it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And again, we're assuming this wasn't a deliberate act of deceit on the part of Mr. Mata, that he simply misheard. But we think that something of this magnitude, it was worth sitting down and talking with you and explaining that those reports, that claim simply was not true. And with that said, is there anything else we wanted to say? I think we've been talking to these poor people for over an hour.
We've been running like a racehorse down these twisting roads. I was trying to bring it back full circle. I'm sorry.
So think about maybe for the next book club, maybe we talk about Racehorse Haynes. He deserves it. He deserves it.
We salute an attorney.
And so again, my profound and most sincere apologies for not recognizing the greatness of Racehorse Haynes.
Well, listen, thank you all so much for listening. If there's more to unpack on this hearing or other rampant misinformation that's going on around the internet as usual, we might check back in. But in the meantime, just stay safe and thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.